All right, guys, Great Gatsby, Chapter 4, Part 2. This chapter begins with Nick reading this exacting list of all of these rich and famous people who came to call on Gatsby during the summer. And as a juxtaposition, we have Gatsby coming to call on little Nick, who's neither rich nor famous. We're wondering why. He has a favor to ask of him. We hear of Gatsby's past, that he went to the war with kind of wanting to die almost because he wanted to forget about something very painful that had happened to him long ago. In the process, apparently, Gatsby really does have a Medal of Valor from World War I. He shows Nick a picture of himself at Oxford standing there with some very famous people. So now Nick, after going back and forth, do I believe this guy's story or not? All of a sudden, wow, that seems pretty legitimate. And then he announces that he wants to ask Nick a very special favor later on today, and later on, I should say, and we're going to read the rest of this chapter and find out exactly what this is all about. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. He hesitated. You'll hear about it this afternoon. At lunch? No, this afternoon. I happen to find out you're taking Miss Baker to tea. Do you mean you're in love with Miss Baker? No, old sport, I'm not, but Miss Baker has kindly consented to speak to you about this matter. I hadn't the faintest idea what this matter was, but I was more annoyed than interested. I hadn't asked Jordan to tea in order to discuss Mr. J. Gatsby. I was sure the request would be something utterly fantastic, and for a moment I was sorry I'd ever set foot upon his overpopulated lawn. He wouldn't say another word. His correctness grew on him as we neared the city. We passed Port Roosevelt, where there was a glimpse of red-belted ocean-going ships, and sped along a cobbled slum lined with the dark, undeserted saloons of the faded, gilt 1900s. Then the Valley of Ashes opened up on both sides of us. We have this again. And I had a glimpse of Mrs. Wilson straining at the garage pump with panting vitality as we went by. So her Cinderella story's over, right? With fenders spread like wings, we scattered light through half Astoria, only half. For as we twisted among the pillars of the elevated, I heard the familiar jug jug spat of a motorcycle, and a frantic policeman rode alongside. All right, old sport, called Gatsby. We slowed down. Taking a white card from his wallet, he waved it before the man's eyes. Right you are, agreed the policeman, tipping his cap. Know you next time, Mr. Gatsby. Excuse me. What was that? I inquired. The picture of Oxford? I was able to do the commissioner a favor once, and he sends me a Christmas card every year. So again, okay, just when we get to the point where Nick is certain of who Gatsby is, he's driving into New York City and a police officer doesn't recognize him. Once more, his identity is called into question. I'll gloss over it for now. Over the great bridge with the sunlight through the girders making a constant flicker upon the moving cars. Oh, we're driving into New York City now. With the city rising up across the river in white heaps and sugar lumps, all built with a wish out of a non-olfactory money. The city seen from the Queensboro Bridge is always the city seen for the first time in its first wild promise of all the mystery and the beauty in the world. A dead man passed us in a hearse heaped with blooms, followed by two carriages with drawn blinds and by more cheerful carriages for friends. The friends looked out at us with the tragic eyes and short upper lips of southeastern Europe, and I was glad that the sight of Gatsby's splendid car was included in their somber holiday. As we crossed Blackwell's Island, a limousine passed us, driven by a white chauffeur, in which sat three modish Negroes, two bucks and a girl. I laughed aloud as the yolks of their eyeballs rolled toward us in haughty rivalry. Anything can happen now that we've slid over this bridge, I thought. Anything at all. And that is actually correct. So in New York City, social status is topsy-turvy. We've seen this already with Myrtle pretending to be someone she's not in New York City. She's rising above her station. So New York is supposed to be a place where anything can happen. Anything could happen now that we've slid over this bridge, I thought. Anything at all. Even Gatsby could happen without a particular wonder. Roaring noon. In a well-fanned 42nd Street cellar, I met Gatsby for lunch. Blinking away the brightness of the street outside, my eyes picked him out obscurely in the anteroom, talking to another man. Mr. Carraway, this is my friend, Mr. Wolfsheim. A small, flat-nosed Jew, that's not an insult, literally just saying the man was Jewish, raised his large head and regarded me with two fine growths of hair, which luxuriated in either nostril. After a moment, I discovered his tiny eyes in the half-darkness. So I took one look at him, said Mr. Wolfsheim, shaking my hand earnestly. And what do you think I did? What? I inquired politely. But evidently he was not addressing me, for he dropped my hand and covered Gatsby with his expressive nose. I handed the money to Kavanaugh, Gatsby, and I said, "All right, Gatsby, don't pay him a penny till he shuts his mouth." He shut it then and there. Gatsby took an arm of each of us and moved forward into the restaurant, whereupon Mr. Wolfsheim swallowed a new sentence he was starting and lapsed into a somnambulatory abstraction. Highballs? Alcoholic beverages, asked the head waiter. This is a nice restaurant here, said Mr. Wolfsheim, looking at the Presbyterian nymphs on the ceiling, but I like across the street better. Yes, highballs, agreed Gatsby. And then to Mr. Wolfsheim, it's too hot over there. Hot and small, yes, said Mr. Wolfsheim, but full of memories. What place is that? I asked. The old Metropole. The old Metropole, brooded Mr. Wolfsheim gloomily. Filled with faces, dead and gone, filled with faces, gone now forever. I can't forget so long as I live the night they shot Rosie Rosenthal there. There was 6 of us at the table, and Rosie had eaten drunk a lot all evening. When it was almost morning, the waiter came up to him with a funny look and says somebody wants to speak to him outside. All right, says Rosie, and begins to get up, and I pulled him down in his chair. Let the bastards come in here if they want you, Rosie, but don't you, so help me, move outside this room. It was 4 o'clock in the morning then, and if we'd raised the blinds, we'd have seen daylight. Did he go? I asked innocently. Sure he went. Mr. Wolfsheim's nose flashed at me indignantly. He turned around in the door and says, don't let that waiter take away my coffee. Then he went out on the sidewalk and they shot him 3 times in his full belly and drove away. 4 of them were electrocuted, I said, remembering. 5 with Becca. His nostrils turned to me in an interested way. Okay, at this point as a reader, this is the roaring 20s. What kind of people left speakeasies and got shot dead on the sidewalk back in the 1920s? Mobsters, right? 4 of them were electrocuted, I said, remembering. 5 with Becca. His nostrils turned to me in an interested way. I understand you're looking for a business connection. The juxtaposition of these 2 remarks was startling. Gatsby answered for me. Oh, no, he exclaimed. This isn't the man. No? Mr. Wolfsheim seemed disappointed. This is just a friend. I told you we'd talk about that some other time. Well, I beg your pardon, said Mr. Wolfsheim. I had a wrong man. A succulent hash arrived, and Mr. Wolfsheim, forgetting the more sentimental atmosphere of the old metropole, began to eat with ferocious delicacy. His eyes, meanwhile, roved very slowly around the room. He completed the arc by turning to inspect the people directly behind. I think that, except for my presence, he would have taken one short glance beneath our own table. Look here, old sport, said Gatsby, leaning toward me. I'm afraid I made you a little angry this morning in the car. There was the smile again, but this time I held out against it. I don't like mysteries, I answered, and I don't understand why you won't come out frankly and tell me what you want. Why has it all got to come through Miss Baker? Oh, it's nothing underhanded. He assured me. Miss Baker is a great sportswoman, you know, and she'd never do anything that wasn't all right. Suddenly he looked at his watch, jumped up, and hurried from the room, leaving me with Mr. Wolfsheim at the table. He has the telephone, said Mr. Wolfsheim, following with his eyes. Fine fellow, isn't he? Handsome to look at and a perfect gentleman. Yes. He's an Oxford man. Oh. What, Oxford College in England? You know Oxford College? It's one of the most famous colleges in the world. I've heard of it. Have you known Gatsby for a long time? I inquired. Several years, he answered in a gratified way. I made the pleasure of his acquaintance just after the war, but I knew I had discovered a man of fine breeding after I talked with him an hour. I said to myself, there's the kind of man you'd like to take home and introduce to your mother and sister. He paused. I see you're looking at my cuff buttons. I hadn't been looking at them, but I did now. They were composed of oddly familiar pieces of ivory. Finest specimens of human molars, he informed me. Human teeth. Well, I inspected them. That's a very interesting idea. Yeah. He flipped the sleeves up under his coat. Yeah, Gatsby's very careful about women. He would never so much look at a friend's wife. When the subject of this instinctive trust returned to the table and sat down, Mr. Wolfsheim drank his coffee with a jerk and got to his feet. I have enjoyed my lunch, he said, and I'm going to run off from you two young men before I outstay my welcome. Don't hurry, Meyer, said Gatsby without enthusiasm. Mr. Wolfsheim raised his hand in a sort of benediction. You're very polite, but I belong to another generation, he announced solemnly. You sit here and discuss your sports and your young ladies and your... He supplied an imaginary noun with another wave of his hand. As for me, I am 50 years old and I won't impose myself on you any longer. As he shook hands and turned away, his tragic nose was trembling. I wondered if I had said anything to offend him. He becomes very sentimental sometimes, explained Gatsby. This is one of his sentimental days. He's quite a character around New York, a denizen of Broadway. Who is he anyhow? An actor? No. A dentist? Meyer Wolfsheim? No, he's a gambler. Gatsby hesitated, then added coolly, he's the man who fixed the World Series back in 1919. For you Chicago sports fans, this is the World Series that involved the former Chicago Black Sox. They changed their name afterwards because of the controversy. This legitimately, fixing a World Series meant that you paid off the players to lose it so that you could gamble on the outcome and make a lot of money. This is a true fact in baseball history. The 1919 World Series, Chicago Black Sox, Black Stockings, that's why they became the White Sox. They turned over a new leaf after they ditched their criminal ways. The idea staggered me. I remembered, of course, that the World Series had been fixed in 1919, but if I had thought of it at all, I would have thought of it as a thing that merely happened, the end of some inevitable chain. It never occurred to me that one man could start to play with the faith of 50 million people with the single-mindedness of a burglar blowing a safe. How did he happen to do that? I asked after a minute. He just saw the opportunity. Why isn't he in jail? They can't get him, old sport. He's a smart man. I insisted on paying the check. As the waiter brought my change, I caught sight of Tom Buchanan across the crowded room. Speaking of juxtapositions. Come along with me for a minute, I said. I've got to say hello to someone. When he saw us, Tom jumped up and took half a dozen steps in our direction. Where have you been? He demanded eagerly. Daisy's furious because you haven't called up. This is Mr. Gatsby, Mr. Buchanan. They shook hands briefly, and a strained, unfamiliar look of embarrassment came over Gatsby's face. How have you been, anyhow? Demanded Tom of me. How'd you happen to come up this far to eat? I've been having lunch with Mr. Gatsby. I turned toward Mr. Gatsby, but he was no longer there. And we'll stop there with Gatsby's disappearing act at the entrance of Tom. I'm trying to keep these videos shorter for YouTube.